Imagine moving into what looks like the most normal house you've ever seen. A quiet street, a normal family, a normal life. But within weeks, things start to change. You hear footsteps when nobody's home. Objects begin moving on their own. Furniture starts flying across the room. Your daughter is being dragged up the stairs by something nobody can see. Police officers witness it. Neighbours witness it. Paranormal investigators witness it. And today, almost 60 years later, people still claim whatever was inside that house never truly left. This is the terrifying true story of the Black Monk of Pontefract. Welcome to the haunted mind of Jana, the place where we dive into the most creepiest paranormal stories, haunted locations, and unexplained mysteries around the world. If you enjoy spooky stories like this one, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click that little notification button so you're always notified every time I post. Now, let's get into today's nightmare. When most people think of famous hauntings, they usually think about places like Amityville, the Enfield poltergeist, or the Warrens investigations. But hidden away in a quiet Yorkshire town sits what many paranormal researchers believe is one of Britain's most violent hauntings. And surprisingly, a lot of people outside the UK have never heard of it. This story takes us to a normal semi-detached council house at 30 East Drive in Pontefract, West Yorkshire. Looking at it today, you'd probably walk straight past it. No Gothic mansion, no creepy abandoned asylum, no castle, just a completely ordinary family home, which somehow makes everything that happened there even more unsettling. Because if something that terrifying can happen in somewhere that ordinary, could it happen anywhere? This story officially begins in 1966. Joe and Jean Pritchard moved into the house with their two children, Philip and Diane. Like most families, they were excited to start fresh. The house wasn't ancient. It wasn't built on top of some obvious haunted ruin. It wasn't even particularly old. At first, life seemed perfectly normal, but then little things started happening. The kind of things most people would probably ignore. Small puddles of water would suddenly appear around the house, not leaking from pipes, not coming through the roof, just appearing. Dust would mysteriously fall from the ceiling. Lights would behave strangely. Cold spots would suddenly fill entire rooms. At first, the family assumed there had to be a perfectly reasonable explanation. Maybe it was the plumbing. Maybe it was the weather. Maybe the house simply needed repairs. But over the following weeks, those little strange events became impossible to ignore. One evening, the family heard loud banging coming from another room. Joe went to investigate. Nothing. Then, another bang. This time, something actually moved. Objects that had been sitting quietly on shelves were suddenly lying across the floor. At first, the family wondered whether someone had broken into the house, but every door was locked. Every window was closed. There was nobody there. And that's when the activity became impossible to explain. Furniture began moving completely on its own. Pictures hanging on their walls were reportedly found ripped and slashed. Heavy objects were thrown across rooms. Plants toppled over without anybody touching them. Sometimes, things would completely disappear, only to reappear hours later somewhere else in the house. But according to the Pritchards, this was only the beginning. Over the coming months, the house became increasingly violent. Family members reported feeling like they were constantly being watched. Cold gusts of air would suddenly pass through rooms with every window closed. A foul smell, often described as something rotten, would appear without warning, before disappearing just as quickly. And then, the activity seemed to focus on one particular family member, 12-year-old Diane. and what allegedly happened to her would become one of the most disturbing paranormal cases Britain has ever documented. Now, this is where the story takes a much darker turn, because according to the Pritchard family, whatever was in that house didn't want to scare them. It seemed to want their attention, and more specifically, it wanted Diane. At just 12 years old, Diane reportedly became the centre of almost everything that happened inside 30 East Drive. If there was a loud bang, it happened near Diane. If objects started moving, Diane was usually nearby. If something unexplained happened, it almost always involved her somehow. Now, this has led some skeptics to believe that there may have been what paranormal researchers call a poltergeist case. And we'll come back to that theory later. But first, let's talk about what allegedly happened. According to the family, it started with scratching. Not normal scratches, the kind that would suddenly appear out of nowhere. Diane would apparently wake up with fresh marks across her body, despite nobody seeing how they got there. Sometimes, the scratches appeared while other people were in the room with her. And remember, it wasn't just Diane claiming these things. Neighbours, friends, police officers, even paranormal investigators would later witness events inside that house themselves, which is one of the biggest reasons this case has remained famous for decades. Then, things allegedly became physical. The family claimed Diane was pushed, pulled, grabbed, on one occasion, dragged up the stairs by her throat by an invisible force. Now, whether you believe in the paranormal or not, that image is terrifying. Imagine hearing your daughter screaming upstairs, running to help, only to see her somehow being pulled towards the top of the stairs with nobody around her. According to reports, the family desperately tried to pull her back, but whatever they believed was grabbing her neck appeared incredibly strong. As news of the strange events spread across Pontefract, people became curious. Neighbours started visiting. Friends came to see whether the stories were true. Some arriving expecting to expose a hoax. Others simply wanted to see whether anything strange really happened. And according to multiple reports, many left completely shaken. Objects were allegedly thrown across rooms, furniture moved, loud knocking echoed through the house. Some visitors claimed they saw objects lifting into the air before crashing back down. As more witnesses came forward, the local police eventually became involved. Now, police officers aren't paranormal investigators. They aren't looking for ghosts, they were simply responding to reports of disturbances. But according to several accounts, even some of the officers admitted witnessing objects moving with no obvious explanation. One officer reportedly watched a heavy object move across a room by itself. Others described hearing loud bangs throughout the house. Of course, not everyone agreed on what they were seeing. Some believed there had to be a logical explanation. Others walked away convinced something genuinely strange was happening. But one thing everyone agreed on, something inside that house did not feel normal. Then came perhaps the creepiest part of the entire story, the sightings. Because eventually, people claimed they weren't just hearing something anymore. They started seeing it. Witnesses described a tall figure, dressed entirely in black robes, its face hidden beneath what looked like a dark hood. It rarely spoke. It rarely moved. Instead, it simply stood there, watching, sometimes at the top of the staircase, sometimes silently standing in a bedroom doorway. The family originally gave the unseen presence a much less dramatic nickname. They called it Fred. Later, they even started referring to him as Mr. Nobody, because whenever people asked who was making all the noise, the answer was always nobody. It wasn't until newspapers became interested that another name began to spread, the Black Monk. And somehow, that name stuck, even today. It's a name almost everyone associates with the haunting. And here's where things become even stranger. Because once people started asking Who is the Black Monk? Local history offered a chilling possible answer, and whether it's true depends entirely on who you ask. In the next part, we're diving into the history of Pontefract, the legend of the monk, and why some people believe the land itself may be cursed, and the theories that still divide paranormal investigators to this day. Because if the local legends are true, the haunting may have started hundreds of years before the Pritchard family ever stepped through that front door. So, who exactly is the Black Monk? Well, that's where the facts start blending with local legends. And honestly, this is probably the most debated part of the entire case. Before we go any further, it's important to say this. Everything I'm about to talk about comes from local folklore, paranormal researchers, newspaper reports, and stories passed down over generations. Some parts are backed up by historical records. Others have never been proven. So take this next part with an open mind. Pontefract itself has an incredibly dark history. Long before the Pritchard family ever moved into 30 East Drive, the town already witnessed centuries of conflict, disease, public executions, and tragedy. Nearby once stood St. John's Cluniac Priory, a monastery dating back to the 11th century. The monks who lived there followed strict religious rules and spent their lives devoted to prayer. At least, most of them did. According to local legend, one monk broke every vow he had ever taken. Legend tells a story of a Cluniac monk who allegedly became obsessed with a young girl. The story claims he harmed her before eventually being publicly executed for his crimes. Some versions of the legend even suggest his body was buried somewhere near the land where 30 East Drive would later be built. It's really important to point out that the historians have never been able to confirm this story. There are no reports proving that this specific monk ever existed. Many researchers believe that it's simply local folklore that became attached to the haunting after the event at the house became famous. But whether it's true or not, the legend gave people a possible explanation for the mysterious black figure witnesses claim to see. And that's how the name, the Black Monk, became a part of British paranormal history. But here's where things get even stranger. Some paranormal investigators don't actually believe the figure was ever a monk at all. They think the Black Monk was simply the appearance of whatever entity lived in the house chose to take. Think about it. If something wanted to frighten people, a silent figure dressed in black robes would certainly do the job. Others believe the figure may have absolutely nothing to do with the activity. Perhaps people saw the figure and assumed it was responsible for everything else. The truth is, nobody knows. As word of the haunting spread across Britain, journalists descended onto the house. Paranormal researchers arrived hoping they would witness strange events for themselves. Some investigators claimed to experience sudden cold spots. Others reported hearing unexplained knocking. Several described feeling incredibly uncomfortable inside the house, as though they were being constantly watched. One of the reasons this case remains so fascinating is because there wasn't just one witness. There was dozens. Neighbours, friends, police officers, journalists, researchers. Not everyone agreed on what caused the activity, but many agreed something unusual had happened inside that house. So, what are the possible explanations? Let's start with the most common one. Theory number 1, a poltergeist. Many paranormal researchers believe this wasn't actually a ghost at all. They think it might have been a classic poltergeist case. Interestingly, poltergeist activity has often been reported around teenagers experiencing emotional stress. At the centre of this case was Diane, a 12-year-old girl. Because of that, some researchers believe the strange events may somehow have had been connected to her rather than the house itself. Exactly how, nobody really knows. Some believe intense emotional energy can somehow trigger unexplained phenomena. Others completely reject that idea. Theory number 2, a residual haunting. This theory suggests the Black Monk wasn't actually aware of the people living there. Instead, it could simply be a paranormal energy repeating itself over and over again, almost like an old video playing on a loop. If that's true, the figure wasn't haunting anyone intentionally. People were simply witnessing echoes of something from the distant past. Theory number 3, a dark entity. Some paranormal investigators believe the activity doesn't match a traditional haunting at all. They point to the physical nature of the reported attacks, the scratching, the pushing, the objects being thrown, the overwhelming feeling of fear. Because of the other reports, some believe whatever was inside the house may have been something much darker than a human spirit. Whether you believe that or not, it's certainly one of the reasons this case still fascinates paranormal researchers to this day. And finally, there's the skeptical explanation. Some people believe the entire case was exaggerated, or perhaps fabricated. After all, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. But supporters of the case argue something interesting. The Pritchard family never became wealthy because of the haunting. Multiple independent witnesses reported unusual events. Police visited, researchers visited, journalists visited. Even today, the debate continues. 30 East Drive has become one of Britain's most famous paranormal locations. Over the years, ghost hunters from across the world have visited the house. Some have spent entire nights investigating. Many claimed to have captured strange sounds, unexplained shadows, and even responses on paranormal equipment. Others leave convinced nothing paranormal happened at all, which is exactly why this house continues dividing opinions almost 60 years later. Whether you believe every story, some of them or none of them, one thing is certain: the Black Monk of Pontefract has become one of Britain's most talked about hauntings, and honestly, I don't think I'd be volunteering to spend the night anytime soon. What do you think? Do you believe the Pritchard family had really experienced one of the most violent hauntings in British history? Or do you think there's a perfectly logical explanation behind everything that happened inside 30 East Drive? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. I would genuinely love to know what you think. And if there's any haunted locations, paranormal cases, or creepy mysteries you'd like me to cover next, leave those in the comments too. If you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click that little notification button so you're notified every single time I post. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, stay spooky, my friends.